welcome to another episode of Our Years. I'm Reema.
This is Barry.
So, in the last few weeks, I think this past month, I think I've been reflecting a lot about turning or what I am in my 30s versus what I was in my 20s. And I think there are a couple of triggers for it. You turned 30 recently, and I think we've had a lot of conversations about what that means for you and me. And I think also I've rekindled with a friend who I was very close to in my early 20s. It's really interesting to see how different we were then versus now. So I was just reflecting on that. And I was wondering if you think that you are very dissimilar to how you were when you were 20 versus now.
I think that's a good question, and I think we talk about this a lot recently because of the shift. I think that I'm not too different, but at the same time, I do see some like mindset shifts or attitude shifts towards some of the ways I react or respond to situations. And I think it's a result of, being in your 30s, having a different mindset to when you were in your 20s, and the things that you cared about is different.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that like stand out most to you?
I think I used to be super type A when I was in my 20s. And I know being type A is not going to change with age.
I think it does, actually.
Really? I thought it's like a personality trait, that it's like innate.
I don't know if it's innate. Okay, maybe to some degree, I think it's innate,
Yeah.
but I think it can change with your mindset and how you view or care about things, right? And to my point about like some of the things that I cared about in my 20s is different to what I care about now. Like,
Yeah.
For example, trying to perfect something in my 20s versus not really caring that much now that I'm in my 30s.
No, I think
Because I don't have time to care for that much. Like,
Yeah.
I don't have all the time in the world to go and perfect something.
So there's almost like an automatic prioritization that happens
Right.
for things just because of like the function of time, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I feel that too. I feel like, yeah, I think I've become more chill in my 20s because I think I just worried about a lot of things in my 20s that I had no control over. And I spent so much time dwelling on it. And if things didn't go according to plan, right? Like I said, I was super type A. So I had like a plan, I had a backup plan. And if then something didn't go according to the plan, I would just feel so paralyzed. I felt like I was in quicksand and I was just stuck. And I think now, first of all, I don't have that many plans because I'm like nothing works out anyway. so so I think I'm just more fine with not having a set plan, but having broader goals and working and leaning towards those broader goals.
Right.
But day in and day out, I'm not like super stressed about things not working out exactly how I want it to work out. And I think a function of that is just I'm more relaxed.
What degree of type A do you think you were back then? And because to some extent, I feel like you're still type A.
Yeah.
In the sense of like
I'm a baby type A.
Yeah, exactly.
And,
like if you zoom out, I think in the way you plan out your life, you're type A. But in terms of like going on holiday or like travel plans or like making plans with friends, I don't think you're type A. So I think it's like a kind of like a zoomed out high level, like you're still a type A in terms of the way you want to plan out your life or what you want to do with your life.
Yeah.
But I don't think you're that extreme. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think like an example that I can think of is like if I was doing a standardized test, for instance, in my 20s, if I didn't get the exact score that I wanted, then I just like would not be able to like move past that.
You'll want to retry until you get.
Yeah.
Right.
But now I'm like, there's no time.
Yeah.
To get this
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. I think like to similar lines, I think I wrote down something similar. I didn't explicitly call it out type A, type B. I think I'm the same in terms of like, previously when I was young, I would want to perfect something. And I'd really put in a lot of time and effort trying to make it great and perfect before I conclude it or whatever the task or event is. And I think that was a result or that was due to having all the time in the world. Because when you're a student, you have so much time.
I know. I was talking to someone recently and they were giving me like a list of movies to watch. And I had there were 20 and I watched all of them. And they're like, have you watched? So like, are you a cinephile? Are you really movies? I'm like, no. Engineering undergrad gave me a lot of time.
I don't know what engineering you were doing, but I was studying hard. I was in the library day in, day out.
I was not. One of my friends had this like, those memory banks that we used to have that had like
You know, back like 300 movies. In there.
yeah, and it was 300 movie, and I think I watched all of that. I think I watched all the IMDb top 100.
It's true.
Yeah, not because I'm some crazy fan of cinema. I just had a lot of time.
It's true though. I also had all this time to like watch series and dramas. And you know, it's funny because people talk about watching like certain Netflix shows and stuff. I'm like, wait.
Okay, that's on you.
I'm like, where do you have time to do that now that you're in your 30s? I don't have time to do any of this.
I mean, because I think you don't prioritize watching
Yes,
it. I
fair.
think there's
That's
enough hours to do it, but you're like, you'd rather be outside.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I spend most of my time outdoors, so
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, going back to
But now we have jobs that require us to actually.
exactly.
Be
No,
committed.
but that's the thing, right? Like, all it's people at work that talk about these shows, and I'm like, we have the same work. It's very evident that they're doing less work than us.
But yeah, in your 360, you're like, you watch these shows.
Exactly. They had all the time to watch all the 4 seasons of White Lotus.
Only 3. Come on.
Yeah, and they talk about it. I'm just like, I have not watched it. But anyway, going back to the topic that we were talking about, I think, you know, like the biggest thing for me, and I think it's very similar to what you mentioned, type A, type B. I think it's just like the shift of having a lot of time back then to go and perfect something. And so kind of that encouraged me to be a perfectionist, right?
Yeah.
And then now that I'm in my 30s, I honestly don't have time and the bandwidth and energy to go and perfect something. And it's not to say that, you know, I don't do anything well.
Yeah, you're not half-assing it.
Right. It's like 95% complete in my 20s versus now maybe 85%.
I think as you get older, you also just gain perspective, right, of what's important and what's not.
Right.
So even the standard of what is perfect sort
Right.
of shifts,
Right.
because you now sort of look at the bigger picture because of all
That's
you've
true.
learned.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think like back then maybe I thought that really made a difference, 85% versus 95%. And now in the grand scheme of things, I think like people just care that it's done, you know. Obviously depending on the situation, if you're like applying for a job and you really want to get it or you want to get promoted into a very high level position, obviously you're going to put in a lot more effort. But I think you kind of pick and choose what you want to prioritize and put in effort to perfect, versus in my 20s I felt like I needed to perfect everything.
Yeah. I think that's what when you're in your example of me, you said that, when we travel, for instance, I'm not really bothered about
Right.
like making a checklist and
Yeah.
marking everything off. Like, I don't think that has changed so much for me. I've always been a person who's thought I really love traveling, but I also know that I'm not going to see and do everything
Right.
in a new place that I want to. Right? So it's still fun to do the things that I do get to do. So I've never been too caught up on that. But I think I've actually gotten more type A about travel now, which is interesting because you've not seen the part that was like super chill.
Yeah.
Because back in when I was just like, when I was traveling with my friends or family in my 20s, I would just like turn up at a place and then figure out what I want to do. Now, at least I still have a vague idea of what I want to see. Because also, that's another function of like you don't have too much time to travel.
Right. And so you want to, like value the time that you have. No, I get that. And I think like we're similar in that way, in the way we travel. I think like back in the day, I was also like very type A. And that's one of my things that I learned 20 versus 30s is that in my 20s, I felt like I needed to plan out my life. Like by 25, I would meet the love of my life. And by 27, I would get married. 30s, I would have a kid. I'm 30, single, happily single.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, in your 20s, you have this idea of like what life should be, and you forget that life happens to you also. And it's not only you happening to life, And so I think one of the biggest mindset shifts is that you can't really plan anything to the T and it will work out that way.
You had some sort of like conviction that it would work out. You just have to put in the hard work and it will work out. Right?
That's exactly what I thought.
And then you go through the decade and you're like, nope.
It's like you take a left turn when you don't want to take a left turn because life happens to you and forces you to take a detour, right? And kind of like learned in the last 10 years, you can have this high level plan. And it's not to say, you shouldn't plan out your
Oh yeah,
life.
yeah.
That's
Don't just go with the flow.
right,
Have an idea
right.
of what you want your life to be.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it's like also a manifestation of where you want to be. Your goals and stuff won't change. It's just the path that to get to your goal will likely deviate somewhat according to the changes in life. Like I never thought that I would come to America and
Really?
build a life here. Yeah. It was never in the plan.
It's so surprising because I feel like you're so. When I look at you here, I'm like, you were always meant to be here, like you fit in so well.
Right. And I think like the thing is, right, going back to like being type A in terms of planning out your life, I think it makes sense that I'm here and that I fit in here because this is the life that I wanted. But I didn't think that I would be in America to make that vision come to life, right? I think like back in the day I was just like, okay, I'm going to go down this path. I was actually doing finance, economics and finance. And
Oh
I
my
thought
God.
I was gonna be a finance girl. And yeah, I thought I would go down the finance route. I thought that I would, go into consulting or go into just like the big four accounting firms, anything to do with finance, really. And then climb up the corporate ladder and then ultimately, start my own company. And then life just happened and I did engineering instead.
You're Asian.
Because I'm Asian. But yeah, like I think like at the end of the day, right, my ambitions don't change. Like I wanted always to grow and achieve more in life and ultimately get to a place where I feel like I have control over what I want to do. And I think I'm on that path. It's just the path is different to what I imagined it to be.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's the one of the biggest learnings that I've had is to be okay with changing outcomes.
Yeah.
And dealing with an outcome quickly that I wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
To be able to do that pivot, I think was a big learning, and it's really nice when I'm able to do it.
I think like that's all to teach us that, in the last 10 years, that adaptability and flexibility to changes in your life is a skill. And it's something that once you get a hold of that and understand how to adapt and be flexible according to those changes, I feel like that's what makes you successful. And I like a quote that I've always like resonated with when I was younger is like happiness is not a destination, it's a journey. Um
That's such a bad quote.
No, but I resonated with that because, you always think that, it's like an end goal. When you're a kid, you're just like, okay, I'm going to plan this, and get to a certain place, and that's how I'll be happy and successful. But actually, like, it's the journey that you go on and the adventures that you go on that make you grow and become the person that you are today.
Yeah. No, I agree.
I feel like you're judging me hard.
No, that I do all the time. But no, I like that.
Very similar to what you're saying, type A, type B, because we understand that, life happens and you can't really plan everything.
Yeah, and you can't just be like, this is who I am,
Mm-hmm.
and so why isn't this working out? Yeah.
Another thing when I think about, 20s versus 30s is it's interesting that in my 20s, I wanted to be like, and I think this is like psychological, but when you're a kid, you always want to be older, wiser, and, be more like stable. And you try to like act older and act wiser. And it's funny because I think now that I'm in 30s, I kind of embrace the inner child and I embrace enjoying things that children enjoy. It's just like the simplicity and the purity of just enjoying things in life. And I think maybe that comes with all the stress and pressure that you get when you're in your 30s. Like you have a lot more responsibility and stress in general because you're an adult now, right? And so it's interesting to see that in my 20s, I always just wanted to like grow up fast, and become wise and have people see me in a different light as in like I'm super mature and I have all of this like ahead of me and stable and everything. And now that I'm in my 30s, I've kind of achieved that to a certain extent, but at the same time like I embrace like doing silly things like for my birthday, having a 30th birthday party. People have 30th at like a very fine dining restaurant with their friends, sit down dinner. And I got all my friends to come in inflatables to run around in the park. it's like I really had a good time, and I think all my friends had a good time.
Yeah.
And I think it's just everybody in this age group is just kind of really trying to embrace being a child, or kind of enjoy and not hide that part of them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting. I haven't thought about it like that, but it's true. Like, I feel like play is almost lost when you get older.
Right. Do you think that that's like a societal expectation, and that's why we kind of try to hide that part of us? Like, we're expected to be a certain way in our 30s, and so we don't show so much play because maybe we'll be perceived as being not so serious.
I don't know. That's a really good question. I've never thought about it. I think the people in my life who are silly, that's like their whole personality. Like, they use humor to deflect um any sort of other negative emotion. They use that as a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
And that's just like their personality. Like, if you think of our friends, like our common friend, like, I feel like we know who's the silly one and who's not, right? So I feel like it's almost becomes like a personality trait when you start using it. And there are people who just don't use it. I feel like it's two extremes. I feel like I'm not seeing middle ground.
Really? I feel like we're middle ground. I feel like we take our life very seriously, but I think, at least for me, right, like with certain people that I feel safe around,
Yeah.
I'm able to be just like super silly and super like playful, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that.
And I think, like, it's, to me, I think it's a societal expectation. Like, I feel like maybe to a certain extent, if I'm silly all the time,
People won't take you seriously.
exactly. And we've seen that with our friends, right? To your point about, certain friends being known as the silly one, that reputation makes us think maybe they're not so serious about like their work,
Yeah.
or life, you know.
And then we have to like take a step back and be like, no, they are actually.
Right.
That's a conscious decoupling that you have to do.
Yeah, but I think it's a balance. I think it needs to be a balance. I think, and that's what I feel like I look for in any sort of relationship or friendship, right? Like, I feel like I get along best with people who have that balance, who are able to be silly and carefree, but at the same time, when needed to be, they are also serious.
Yeah. I was talking to one of our friends after your birthday party, and she said that she was so glad you did that because I think just this year has been so hectic for her at work, and she just got a new place, so she's had to deal with like the issues that come up with home ownership. And she was just going to work, doing chores, and going to bed. And she's like, that day was good to just be silly and laugh.
Right.
And so I'm glad that some people still have that and they're able to show other people that it still exists. Like, play is still fun.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think like that was my goal of my birthday, right? Like, I didn't think it was so much about celebrating me, but more so just celebrating being in my 30s with my friends, and all my friends having a good time and having laughs. And I think like we don't get enough of that, because to your point, or your friend's point, right? Like, we get so caught up with life and how serious our day to day is, like trying to cover all the responsibilities and make sure that our life is on track, that we forget about making time to have play and being carefree.
Yeah, I think that's a good reminder. And I see the difference in people that don't have it, like who are very much like in the rat race, and there's no fun in their life.
Right.
And I'm glad our Jody Weave is like still a little bit alive.
Yeah. But yeah, I think like that was like a huge shift for me. I think now more so, I care about like that balance of, infusing silliness into a more serious life.
Yeah. And you think the trigger is that because you have such a stressful like job and life that you needed an outlet for it?
Not necessarily an outlet. I think I try to be mindful about, not being serious all the time. So I think like that's a part of something I do already. So I don't necessarily think I need an outlet, but I think it's nice when you share laughter and fun with other people, especially in this age. What are some of your 20 versus 30s?
I think in my 20s, or even up until my 20s, I lived life and viewed things very much in black and white. There was not a lot of gray areas. It was
Same.
very much like this or this. Pick a lane, and if you don't pick a lane, then you're copping out. You know?
Give an example of that.
Yeah, like if I had a friend who turned vegetarian, for instance, because she cared about, for environmental reasons and animal cruelty reasons, and she chose to be vegetarian, but if she had a leather bag, I'd be like, no, then you're not a good vegetarian. Like it's stuff like that.
The judgment.
Yeah, and now in hindsight, I was like, why? Like tiny drops make an ocean. So the fact that somebody is doing anything is enough, right? But yeah, this is what I mean by black and white. And now in my continuum
Yeah.
of not giving NF, this is one of those things where I'm like, there's so many gray areas, and people are just trying their best.
People are hurrying.
Yeah,
Give them some grace.
yeah, and they're just trying their best, and they're doing what they can. And if
Yeah.
they want a nice bag, then just let them have it.
Right.
Yeah, so that's what I mean by very gray and like white and black versus now it's more gray. I see so much more perspective now. And I think you grow older and you just get that, right? I also now have moved to a place where I I used to live in a very like homogeneous society, right? Because a lot of people were in the same socioeconomic background as me that were around me. There wasn't like a huge difference in the people in my life. When I moved here, people's backgrounds are so different, not just like nationality wise, just like their upbringing versus what they are now. I just they have so much perspective, so that's also helped. It's just I think a way of just my horizons have expanded, gained a lot of perspective, learned a lot from other people's experiences. So it's also like a function of just growing older, I think.
Right. Something else along the lines of, in your 20s, you kind of want to be wiser and be more stable, versus in your 30s, you want to be a little more silly. I think in addition to that, I feel like what I've noticed in my 30s or late 20s is that there's so much more I want to experience. It's funny, I thought about how people say, 30s is the new 20s. How do you feel about that quote, and do you agree?
I think I agree in the sense that I thought hitting 30 was this like big milestone, like it was a big number, and I had to have certain things completed
Right.
for that. And if not, then I've done something wrong. But I look around and I have so many 30-year-olds just trying to figure out life. They're doing their best and they're just trying to figure out what they want for their personal life, for their professional life. And I think I thought that would happen when we were in our 20s.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I see how 30s are the 20s.
Yeah.
Right? I feel like in our 20s, we were teenagers, basically. We were just running around.
You were. I'm kidding.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, and I think we were just children, and how did I imagine that I'd have life figured out when, so many things, there were so many changes that were happening in my life. I was growing so much that I think my 30s are now uh, a reflection of all the lessons I've learned in my 20s and what I do that. So I would say 30s are the new 20s. That makes sense to me.
Yeah. I think 30s are the new 20s with money. And I think that gives you access to a lot more things that you couldn't experience when you were in your 20s. Right?
Yeah.
I think when you're in 20s, you're a lot more like frugal. And so the places you would go, the things you would buy, the
experiences you'd have,
right, would be a lot different. But I think like mindset, to your points, I think it is a more elevated mindset than when you were in 20s. But I think like that energy to want to experience and explore is still there. And so going back to my point, I think what I wanted to say is that like in my 20s, sure, I wanted to like figure out things and build a life that I wanted. And so I was like very set on becoming wiser and becoming a certain person. And then in my 30s, I think going back to my point about being like silly and stuff like that, I think in addition, I want to actually experience a lot more now, because it's almost like I have a ticket, which is, financial stability, to go and access all these different experiences and things that I couldn't do when I was in my 20s. So I think it's like similar mindset, and I still want to build a stable life, but in addition to that, I still maintain. Is that contradictory? Like, I still maintain wanting to be silly and stuff like that, but at the same time,
you're living life in grey.
there we go. There you go. It's not black and white.
Yeah, I think people can be multiple things, and we shouldn't pigeonhole them.
That's true. I think maybe because like the mindset in my 20s is that, I don't have money. And so the goal is to get money or financial stability, become wiser and be seen a certain way so that you establish yourself, right? And now that I have in my 30s, I'm almost going back to my 20s and reliving my 20s, but now having access and having the reputation for the work I do. So not caring about going on holiday and people think I'm slacking, and having the money to go and enjoy my holidays the way I want to enjoy them.
Yeah.
And do things that I want to do. So, yeah.
Having more disposable income is great.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, no need to be like filthy rich.
I mean, like you always say, Bag always says more money, more problems, and I'm like, I'll take it. I'll take the problems.
I think I don't need to be filthy rich, but I think I need to be rich enough to do the things I want to do without a problem. Yeah.
That's a good metric.
More money, more problems.
No.
Because I was explaining to Rima, the problem with having too much money is that you don't know who your real friends are.
We've already made real friends, so they'll just come along for the ride.
Okay, so you want to be filthy rich after you've established your friend group.
Like, so today if someone gives me a bunch of money, I'll take it.
Fair. Okay,
Yeah.
even I'll take it.
So you take the problems.
No, I would take the problems. Because, like, I guess people will be more intentional about maintaining friendships. So, I think I see that to a certain extent.
People that were your friends when you were poor, the ones that
Correct. Yeah, or like people who
wants to keep around.
Yeah, or the people that are still like who are maybe the leaves of my friendship tree are now coming back to try to be the branches. Because of a certain lifestyle I live or a certain reputation I have for the work that I do.
Yeah. Oprah Winfrey once said that the people that didn't ride with you in the back of the bus don't deserve to come with you in the limousine.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
You agree with Oprah?
No, I don't know. I'm just surprised that you would say something like this or you would remember something like this.
Yeah, because I was like, I mean, I was just like, when I was reading that, I was like, some people's lives are so different.
Yeah. But it's true, like you want to, the people who are around during your darkest hours are the people that you keep. And obviously those are the people who don't really care whether you have money or not. We went on a tangent.
Yeah, we did. I think another way I'm really different now is in terms of how I learn or the systems that I want to be in. For instance, when I was in my 20s, I loved being in school because I really loved it because I loved knowing that if I put in this input, I'll get this output. And I loved that I knew it was so standardized. I knew if I just did this would happen and I would get like, this is the rubric for grading. And it was just so black and white. And I loved that someone just told me, here, do this and you'll be fine. Right? Versus now, I don't think I can learn like that or just even like live like that. I can't live in such a regimented way. Now I like more open-ended problems. I like figuring it out by myself. I like taking time with it. Right. I'm so much more patient.
I was just about to say, I feel like you lived a life where life was a formula.
Yeah.
And like, if you use this formula, you'll definitely get an outcome.
Yeah. Like it was so structured, I love it. Right. Loved it.
But life doesn't work out that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so now you feel like you're someone who is okay with all these variables and
yeah. I'm okay with not seeing results immediately. I'm understanding that good things take time and you have to put in the work, but you may not see the outcome immediately. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I have so much more patience with how I approach things now that I didn't previously. But previously, like I think it was also because of like the type A thing where I was like, I want this now, and if I don't get it, then I'm like, wouldn't know what to do. Mm. Now I'm more okay with, like I said, having open-ended problems or having open-ended approaches.
Do you think you're okay with the outcome not being exactly what you wanted?
I think it depends on what it was, but to a large extent, yes.
Yeah, like it can be like a different variation of what you expected for yourself.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Like the career that I have now was not a career I imagined. Like I almost stumbled onto like the function of a program manager and I didn't know what that was before. Mm-hmm. So a lot of those things I'm like learning and figuring out. Right. But yeah, there are certain things that I want, like certain financial milestones that I want to hit, for instance, right? But maybe the broader picture is similar, but how I get there is different, and I'm learning to be okay with not having that path laid out and being like, here's the manual, follow this, and
Yeah.
if you don't, then there's something wrong with you. Now I'm okay with figuring it out.
Yeah, I think like a point that I made earlier is being flexible, right? And I think like a big part of growing from your 20s to your 30s is learning adaptability. And I think that is such a golden like ticket to figuring out life and doing life in a certain way that it ends up in a variation of the result that you want.
Yeah.
I think not having the ability to adapt will ultimately cut you short on becoming or getting to the place that you want to be.
Yeah.
I think in my 20s, the reason we didn't account for all these different life variables is because we were so pure and we didn't know what we didn't know, right? Well, we didn't know what we don't know, which is life has so many turns and detours. Like, you can't really expect that things go exactly the way that you want it to go.
Yeah.
Do you think that in your 20s, your life revolved a lot around how you think society expects of you?
No. I don't think I was ever one of those people that cared about societal expectations. So that is something that has continued through my 20s and 30s. I think my mother wished I cared a little bit more.
Right.
Like that was a constant thing that we both had about how I presented myself to society was what she thought I should be doing. But now I don't think I was affected by that.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I was like, oh, I can't be a degenerate. You know, like I need to have a job, but
Yeah.
like something that I care about,
Right.
and maintain like certain relationships, platonic, romantic, and so on, and behave a certain way. But
Right.
I don't think I was too concerned about what society thought.
Do you think like in your 20s, the path that you were on was purely what you wanted for yourself?
No, honestly, I didn't know what I wanted for myself. I was just like, oh, it'll just happen. I just need to go with the flow and, do this job, study this particular thing, and then eventually I'll find my way. I was figuring out a lot of things. Did you? How do you feel?
I think I didn't in the sense of, not needing to study a certain major because of what society expected, or not getting into a certain job because society expected me. My parents' expectation. I think to a certain extent, I did felt like they had a certain expectation, and I think all parents do, right? It's like they want to see the best for their children, and so there was a certain expectation. And so when I'm in 20s, I think I held myself to those expectations that my parents had for me in terms of what they thought success was, right? Like it didn't necessarily needed to be like a certain job.
Yeah.
But more so, they felt like I needed to be successful and what does success look like? And so I need to follow those guidelines in order to make them feel proud of me. But at the same time, not black and white, but I also felt like I kind of like pushed back against certain expectations. Like, for example, my parents are Asian, strict tiger parents, right? They kind of expected me to be a good student. And I think I was a good student, but I also at the same time, I wanted to show them that being a good student is one thing, and doing things that what they thought wasn't a good student, like going to parties, or like, hanging out late with your friends and doing things outside of work doesn't impact my being a good student attitude. And so, yeah, I think in my 20s, I tried to really kind of meet those expectations, but at the same time, show them that those expectations or what society expected of what a good student isn't necessarily a good thing or good for my mental health.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never had that. I think fortunately or unfortunately, my parents didn't hold me or didn't impose any standards on me or expectations when I was growing up. Obviously, like I said, don't be a degenerate. But I think at one point my mom told me that she doesn't put pressure on me because I put so much pressure on myself. And she said that she never felt the need to, set those expectations on me because my standards for myself were already high. In fact, too high that I was I was very unhappy because of like the goalposts that I had set for myself. So I think my parents had to like sort of be more chilled out in terms of how they parented me, and they had to like take some of the pressure that I put on myself off. Like that was their thing.
Interesting, different perspective of parents, because my parents also know that I have very high standards for myself.
Yeah, they were like, go for it.
I remember coming home and it's like I have these high standards for myself and they know it, right? And they know that I put a lot of pressure on
You're
myself.
like, that's our girl.
And yet, when I come home saying, "Oh, I got second place in the Olympiad," and my dad's like, "Why did you get first?" You know, it's funny, and I think he meant it like in a jokingly way.
But dude, you're thinking about it like 20 years later,
Right,
so
and
it
I'm
made
just
an
like,
impression.
yeah. So I think it's just different parenting styles, and it goes back to you saying that your mom was a Montessori teacher,
Yeah.
or had Montessori.
Yeah, yeah. And I think if for people who are not familiar with Montessori, it's this style of teaching where you treat children as though they have agency and they're autonomous beings who say what their day is going to be like, and you give them and you treat them with that sort of respect, like how you would treat an adult, and not just because they're children, you don't not take them seriously. So I think she's very much of that mindset where people are their own people and you need to listen to them, even from a very young age. So, yeah.
You know, to a certain extent, I feel like there's only so much you can do as a parent, right? You can only try your best and do what's best for your kid and teach them the best things. But ultimately, how they choose to live their life is up to them. Yeah. So there's only so much you can do.
I think that's another thing in my 20s and 30s that's different is that I feel like my relationship with my parents or what I expected from them has also changed a lot. Right? Like in my 20s, I sort of seeked a lot of guidance from them or seeked advice. Versus now, I think I'm doing things like I had to move to another country, or I didn't have to. I chose to move to another country and studied in another country, and I work in another country, and it's such an alien world to them, right? So they can't really give me the guidance that I seek out. So
Interesting.
yeah, it's also like acceptance on my part now in my 30s that they're just not going to be that source for me. Maybe in like other broader areas, like maybe like marriage or kids and stuff like that. That is geography agnostic or culture agnostic. Maybe they can help. But now I feel like I can't go to them with like problems that I have at work or stuff like that.
Well, yeah, different set of problems.
Yeah.
It's also a different generation.
Yeah, and I think it's just very hard for them to understand some of like the things that I'm doing in life, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like what their day job was and what my day job is so different.
Yeah, and I think that's like a natural evolution of different generations and different technologies in different generations, right? And what you have access to in terms of resources.
Yeah.
Another point that I think about quite often is the anxiety shift from when you're in your 20s versus in your 30s. The problems that we had in our 20s seem so minor or minuscule now compared to my 30s. And I guess it's one of those things where you don't know what you don't know. So when you're in your 20s, I always see it as if you're like a little circle to begin with. You're a little baby, and your life is just very small
and contained.
Just your parents, right? And you're not exposed to a lot of things. And then as you grow older, that circle gets bigger, and things that includes or things that you're exposed to gets a little bit more complicated, and so that keeps growing, and so that grows based on the things that you learn and are exposed to, the experiences that you get to experience when you're older. And so when you're in your 20s, it's like you're kind of limited to certain things. And so you think that your world is like stressful based on the things that you're exposed to, which is kind of constrained or restricted to what's in your 20s as a student, compared to now when you're in your 30s, that circle's even bigger and you have more things at stake and more things you're responsible for. And so the anxiety that you have now in your 30s is much more complex than when you were in your 20s. How do you feel about anxiety in your 20s versus 30s?
I was a very anxious person in my 20s. Like to the previous point about how my mother was talking about my pressure, I put a lot of pressure on myself. And I had to really sort of get external intervention. Like I went to a cognitive behavior therapist to address some of my anxiety because it was getting to a point where it was just not sustainable. There was no way I could behave like that or just continue my life like that and like not have a stroke again. So I just like I knew I had to change something about it. And I think that really helped. And I'm really glad I did that because right now, to your point, where now we have to deal with the real things, like the real issues.
Right.
I feel like I'm so much better equipped to deal with that kind of stress. Or like I just know what my trends are, what my patterns are for how on like when I'm very anxious, I can identify those trends now. I'm better at like seeing it before someone else points it out, and I'm able to remedy it before it gets too bad, right? So I used to be very, very anxious in my 20s. I don't miss that part of my 20s at all. And now I've just sort of learned how to handle it better, how to address it better, and make changes in my life that's more sustainable.
Do you feel like it's easier for you to identify symptoms of you being anxious
Yeah.
and quickly be able to like change something about the way you're acting so
Yeah.
that doesn't get bad?
Yeah. And it could be simple things. Like previously in my 20s, for instance, if I had a problem at work and I was like heads down trying to work through it, I just like wouldn't eat. Like I'd forget to eat. And it's so strange to me now when I say this to you, but like that was my life.
Yeah.
Versus now, if I and it's sort of like a circle, right? Because if you don't eat, you don't have the energy.
Right.
So you're putting in this work, but you're exhausted. You're
Right.
way more exhausted because you don't have the fuel. And then it's just like a vicious cycle. You're tired, but your problem is not solved, and then you just keep going in that loop. But now I'm like, now if I'm at work and I have a problem and I'm not making a headway, I just take a break and I go eat something or I go for a walk. And it's just so simple.
Right.
But I literally needed someone to tell me to do that.
Yep.
And I'm glad I learned that. And it's stuff like that. Like I know now that if I feed my body, I'm fueling my mind. It's just so simple, but it's stuff like that that I needed to learn. What about you? How were you anxious in your 20s versus now?
I think I was anxious back then, but going back to my point, I feel like
About which points you were anxious about.
Yeah. I feel like the point that I was anxious about back then is so minuscule compared to what I'm getting anxious over now in my 30s. But to your point, I think now I know what my symptoms are, and I know when I'm about to feel burnout. And how to kind of like stop it before I get to burnout, so that I can maintain or sustain myself for a longer period of time by doing things or taking myself away from that environment and kind of refueling myself so that I can come back stronger or with more energy. And I think like anxiety will always be around, I feel, given all the stress and expectations that we have for just life, you know. So I think it's just finding a balance and finding a way to sustain yourself in a healthy way so that you can react to anxiety in a way so that you don't get burnt out too easily.
Yeah.
So I think that was a big difference. I think in my 20s it was almost like, okay, there was anxiety, but I kind of just kept on going, and I didn't know what burnout was. I didn't know what anxiety was. I was just kind of like, okay, this is just pressure that I'm feeling from, needing to do certain things, and I'll just keep going because pressure is what propels me in that direction. And I guess I never was able to identify what burnout looked like, and so it was just me continuously going and driving forward. But now that I'm in my 30s, I feel like a lot more at ease in a certain way because I think I'm more easily able to like take a step back and take a breather before going back and diving in deep.
Yeah. Man, I don't miss that part of my 20s at all.
Yeah. But I think to some extent it
was needed.
Yeah,
to build. Yes, to build the character.
Right. And I think because of that, we're stronger now, right? And we have a more like solid,
resilient.
Yeah, resilient, and we persevere things a lot better than if we weren't able to do that when we were in our 20s.
Funnily enough, one of the things that I was very different in my 20s versus now is actually how sheltered I was. So I had all this anxiety, but I was super sheltered.
Interesting. What a contrast.
Yeah.
Like it's funny, and I say it's a contrast is because to me, right, what I imagine shelter to be is being sheltered from all like the stress and anxiety.
No. I think a lot of people, like, I think sheltering is different. I think a lot of people think sheltering is also like your parents don't let you, like, they're constantly like helicopter parents, right? You're sheltered from a lot of experiences because they don't let you have them
Right.
because they're trying to protect you from
Mhm.
harm's way. But I don't think I was sheltered in like that sense. Like, I didn't have a curfew. My parents knew all my friends, so it's not like they were like, oh, don't hang out with like this group. It was never like that. I was allowed to pick, I could pick my own friends. I could watch and read whatever I wanted. Nothing was censored, right? So, not sheltered in that sense, but sheltered in a way that everyone around me had a similar background. So, like we had help for everything, for instance, and all my friends had help. So, that it wasn't a thing that you really had to reconcile. Versus when I came here and I had to like learn all these like life skills, like to cook and like do all these other things, like make repairs or do like woodwork. It's like I didn't have those skills. And I think that's what I mean by sheltered. Not that I was like not allowed to experience things, but sheltered in a way that there were these experiences that nobody thought I should be having and nobody around me was having. So I didn't even see the difference.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like I learned to cook only when I moved here. And now I'm like, oh, it's such an important skill for that everybody to have. But I've always had help, so I've never needed it. And I think that's what I mean by sheltering.
I think I get what you mean in terms of like sheltered. When I think of sheltered, it's more so like not being exposed to certain things in the world,
Right.
or society. And to some extent, yes, you weren't exposed to like needing to do your own dishes or needing to iron your own clothes, or clean the house or make your bed.
Yeah, you have a very charmed life.
Yeah, I think my parents, like, I also live a very privileged life when growing up, but I think like my parents really cared for making sure that we understand the privilege and that we actually still needed. So even though we had help at home, I think they cared about us still doing the dishes, even though we had help, right? Like they were like, if you finish your food, just wash it, like you don't need to wait for our help to clean it up after you. They're just there to help us when we are bad with constraint, right? Yeah, but it's funny, and I think I agree with you. I was in your term sheltered in a way that my friends all had help and all my friends lived these lives, if not better lives than I did. And I think it's funny because some of them didn't even know how to like read the time until a certain age, like in high school. They didn't know how to read a watch.
I don't
like
know if that's sheltering.
analog
Yeah, I
watch.
get that. I don't know if that's sheltering or just willful ignorance.
Yeah, yeah, it's just interesting. One last point I wanted to make about a huge difference that I see in my 20s versus 30s, and I think it's a theme, is quality over quantity in your 30s versus in your 20s. And I think that applies to majority of things in my life, right? But one that I think particularly sticks out is friendship. I think in my 20s, it was all about, having all these variety of friends and having all these different friend groups that you go to for different things. And like, I put in a lot of emphasis and time and energy into maintaining a lot of different friends. And I think that also is the nature or the function of having a lot more time. So, you had time to like go out with different friends. And going back to our friendship episode where we talked about like now due to limited time that you have, you only invest in friends that you think are quality friends and people that you do actually feel like you will maintain a friendship for a very long time. And I think we were talking about this the other day, right? Like you kind of stop going to events where you feel like it'll be a lot more small talk than actually deep thought provoking conversations. And I think I agree with that. I think in my 30s now, I show up at events or I make plans with people that I feel like will kind of intrigue me in an intellectual way. And you're able to have thought provoking conversations rather just small talk. I think like when I was in my 20s, I was so good at small talk. Like I would just be able to start a conversation with anyone and maintain that conversation for like a good hour.
Maybe that's how you're good at flirting back then.
Oh my
Flirting is basically
gosh.
small talk.
Flirting is small talk.
Yeah.
I'm so
And now
bad at it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, I definitely agree. And I think like I avoid it nowadays. Like if I know I'm going to an event and I know that it's only going to be small talk, I kind of just don't go. I'd rather be at home chilling with like myself or like doing things on my own, because what value does that add to my life?
Yeah. Just being more intentional with your friends.
Right. I think, yeah, that's a good word. I think in your 30s, you're a lot more intentional about the things that you do. Not to say that in my 20s I didn't. I think now I'm just a lot more clearer on where I want to spend my time and energy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And so I think that's a big difference. And I think it continues to be going forward, that quality is a lot more important than quantity, and that goes for anything.
Yeah, I agree.
Even with the things we buy, right? Like quality.
Yeah.
We enjoy the nicer things.
Yeah, some of us more nicer than others, but yeah. No, honestly.
Says Rima, who the other day comes and says, you know, I don't know why I am the way I am, but I can only wear pure gold.
I literally have an allergy. This is not made up. You and my dad both think this is made up.
I know it's not made up because my sister's also like this.
Yeah, I can't wear costume
She
jewelry.
can't. No, I feel like she's actually worse than you. If she like even watches,
Yeah.
she has to wear like genuine leather, or she has to wear like certain like
Grade
pure
of gold.
Yeah, like she can't wear any sort of jewelry that is impure.
This is, we didn't choose this life. This life chose us.
But yeah, I think obviously there's a lot more to the differences between our 20s and our 30s, but I think these are kind of the big ones that stand out most to us.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we'd really like to hear what you guys think. And if you guys resonated with some of these, or if you had something else that you felt we didn't pick up on or we didn't point out, and that you felt was very different, 30s versus 20s, we'd really like to hear about that. I think I was going through some on the internet, and it was interesting to see what other people experienced and what they pointed out. So we would love to hear from you guys. Drop in the comments or write to us on our email. It's all in our bio. But it was good chatting, as usual. Toodles. We'll wrap it up here. See you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye.